Listen, most people think economic freedom comes from government policy or market conditions. But what if I told you the real principle that saves you when everything collapses has nothing to do with economics and everything to do with one decision you make in your darkest hour? I discovered this at 29 when I lost $47,000, my entire life savings. And it didn't just rebuild my finances. It revolutionized how I understood freedom itself. In the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through this life-changing economic principle that saved me from complete financial ruin. And if you stay with me until the end, you'll discover how to rebuild your financial life from absolute zero, even when every expert says it's impossible. So before we dive in, do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because I want to know if you're ready to understand the real economics of personal survival, the kind they never teach you in any classroom. Here's what they never tell you about hitting rock bottom. Let me take you back to 1941. I was 29 years old, fresh out of Columbia University, with my PhD in economics. I thought I understood how the world worked. I had studied under some of the greatest minds in economic theory. I could explain monetary policy. I could debate Keynesian economics. I could analyze market structures. And I didn't know a damn thing about survival, because that year I lost everything, $47,000. Now, you might hear that number today and think, well, that's not so bad, but let me put this in perspective for you. In 1941, $47,000 was more than most people made in 10 years of hard labor. It was a house. It was a future. It was security for my young family. And I lost every single cent of it. Not in the stock market. I wasn't some reckless speculator gambling on stocks. I lost it because I trusted the wrong people with a business investment that collapsed. I lost it because I thought my education made me smarter than I actually was. I lost it because I believed that understanding economic theory meant I understood economic reality. And I learned very quickly that knowing how markets should work in theory doesn't mean a damn thing when you're standing in your kitchen at 3 in the morning wondering how you're going to feed your children. My wife, Rose, was 5 months pregnant with our second child. We had a 1-year-old son. We were living in a tiny apartment in New York City. And suddenly, we had no savings, mounting debts, and my salary from my government job was barely covering rent. I would lie awake at night doing calculations in my head. If I skip lunch, that's 50 cents saved. If we turn off the heat at night, that's another $1. If I walk to work instead of taking the subway, that's 30 cents. I was one of the most educated economists in the country, and I was counting pennies like a desperate child. And here's what nobody tells you about rock bottom. It's not just financial. The money is the surface problem. The real devastation is what it does to your identity, to your sense of self-worth, to your confidence in your own judgment. I had spent years becoming an expert, and that expertise had failed me completely, so what was I? If my knowledge was worthless, if my education couldn't protect me, if my careful analysis had led me into disaster, then what did I have? Have you ever been there? Have you ever had a moment where everything you thought you knew about yourself turned out to be wrong? Where the skills you trusted, the knowledge you'd built, the reputation you'd created, it all collapsed and left you standing in the wreckage wondering who you even are anymore. That's where I was at 29. And I'm telling you this not because I want your sympathy. I don't need it. That was 80 years ago. But because I want you to understand that what I'm about to tell you didn't come from a textbook. It didn't come from a theory. It came from sitting in that kitchen at 3 in the morning with a calculator and a growing sense of panic, trying to figure out how to survive. And in that darkness, I discovered something that changed everything. Not just my finances, not just my career, but my entire understanding of how the world actually works. Because here's what I learned. The principle that saves you when you're drowning isn't about economics at all. It's about something deeper. Something that economists almost never talk about because we're too busy building models and drawing graphs. It's about the fundamental choice every human being has to make when everything goes wrong. And that choice is this. You can spend your energy trying to control the things you cannot control, or you can spend your energy maximizing what you can control with what you have right now. That's it. That's the principle that saved my life. And before you think, well, that sounds obvious, Milton, let me tell you, it's not obvious at all. Because when you're in crisis, every instinct you have screams at you to focus on what you lost, to rage against what's unfair, to blame the people who failed you, to wish things were different, and all of that. Every single bit of it is focusing your energy on things you cannot control. I couldn't control that I'd lost $47,000. I couldn't control that my business partners had made terrible decisions. I couldn't control that we were on the brink of World War II and the economy was about to get even worse. I couldn't control that I had a family depending on me and nowhere near enough money to support them properly. None of that was within my power to change. And I could spend every waking hour being angry about it, being terrified about it, wishing it was different. Or I could ask myself one simple question: what can I actually control right now? And when I asked that question, really asked it, the answer was brutally simple. I could control my effort. I could control my learning. I could control my choices about where to focus my limited time and energy. That was it. That was all I had. But it turned out that was enough. The economics of personal survival nobody teaches you now. Let me tell you exactly how I applied this principle. Because this is where economic theory meets economic reality. And the gap between them is enormous. In economic theory, we talk about maximizing utility, making the best possible choices given your constraints. Sounds reasonable, right? But here's what they don't teach you in graduate school. When you're broke, your constraints aren't just external, they're internal. The biggest constraint isn't your lack of money, it's your lack of clarity about what you can actually control. So I did something that every economist would tell you is irrational. I stopped trying to recover what I'd lost. I stopped spending mental energy on the $47,000, on the business partners who'd failed me, on the investments that had collapsed. I made a conscious decision to treat that money as if it had never existed, because psychologically, I needed to start from zero, not from negative. And this is absolutely critical, so listen carefully. You cannot rebuild from a position of resentment. You cannot move forward while you're looking backward. As long as your mental energy is focused on what you lost, you have no energy left to focus on what you're going to build. And I know this sounds like motivational nonsense, but it's actually hard economics. Energy is a resource. Attention is a resource. And if you're spending those resources on things you cannot change, you're wasting the only resources you have left. So I wrote down 3 columns on a piece of paper. Column 1, things I cannot control. That list was long. The lost money, the past decisions, the economic conditions, the war that was coming, other people's opinions of me, my reputation after this failure, the job market, all of it went in that column. And then I drew a line through that entire column and I never looked at it again because that column was economically irrelevant to my future. Column 2, things I can control. This list was much shorter. I could control how many hours I worked. I could control what I chose to study and learn. I could control my research focus. I could control whether I said yes or no to opportunities. I could control my spending. I could control my attitude toward my work. I could control how I treated my family despite the stress. That was it. Maybe 10 items total. Column 3, actions I will take this week. This was the only column that mattered. And I made a rule for myself that I followed for the rest of my life. I would only put things in column 3 that were directly connected to column 2. If an action wasn't something I could control, it didn't go on the list. Now, here's what happened next. And this is where it gets interesting from an economic perspective. When you focus all your energy on things you can control, 2 things happen that multiply your effectiveness exponentially. First, you stop wasting energy on anxiety. Anxiety is an economic cost. It drains your mental resources. It reduces your decision-making quality. It makes you less productive. It destroys your health, which creates more costs. When I stopped focusing on what I'd lost and started focusing only on what I could do today, my anxiety didn't disappear. Let's be honest, I was still scared, but it became manageable, and that freed up enormous amounts of mental energy for productive work. Second, you start seeing opportunities you couldn't see before. When your mind is consumed with loss, you're in a defensive crouch. You're trying to protect what little you have left. But when you accept that you're starting from zero, your entire strategic position changes. You're not protecting anymore, you're building. And building requires a completely different mindset than protecting. Let me give you a concrete example. Within a month of losing that money, I got an offer to do some research work for the National Bureau of Economic Research. The pay was modest, nothing special. The old me, the me from before the loss, would have probably turned it down because it wasn't prestigious enough, it wasn't going to advance my academic reputation quickly enough. But the new me, the me who was focused only on what I could control, looked at that offer differently. I asked myself, can I control the quality of work I do on this project? Yes. Can I control what I learn from it? Yes. Can I control the relationships I build? Yes. Can I control whether this leads to other opportunities? Yes. So I took it. And that decision changed everything, because that research project led to another project, which led to a book, which led to a teaching position, which led to connections with other economists, which eventually led to the University of Chicago, which led to the research that won me the Nobel Prize 40 years later. But none of that would have happened if I'd been sitting around focused on the $47,000 I'd lost instead of focused on the work I could actually do. You see what I'm telling you here? This isn't some mystical law of attraction nonsense. This is cold, hard economics. When you focus your limited resources, your time, your energy, your attention, on things you can actually control, you maximize your return on those resources. When you waste those resources on things you cannot control, your return is zero. It's that simple. But here's where most people fail. They understand this intellectually, but they don't operationalize it. They nod their heads and say, yes, focus on what you can control, and then they go right back to worrying about the economy, complaining about their boss, obsessing about opportunities they missed, or raging about injustices they cannot fix. And all of that, every single bit of it, is economic waste. So let me ask you directly, what are you spending your mental energy on right now that you cannot actually control? What are you worrying about that is completely outside your power to change? Because I guarantee you, if you're struggling financially, if you're feeling stuck in your career, if you're frustrated with your progress in life, a huge percentage of your energy is going into column 1, the things you cannot control, and almost none of it is going into column 3, the actions you can take today. Why most people stay stuck and how you break free. Now, I need to tell you something that most motivational speakers won't tell you because it's uncomfortable and it challenges the narrative that anyone can do anything. Here's the truth. You probably can't control as much as you think you can. And that's actually good news if you understand why. Most people overestimate their control over outcomes and underestimate their control over inputs. Let me explain what I mean. When I lost that $47,000, I could not control whether I would become wealthy again. I could not control whether my career would recover. I could not control whether I would ever be recognized as a serious economist after such a spectacular failure. Those were all outcomes, and outcomes are always partially dependent on factors outside your control: luck, timing, other people's decisions, market conditions, technological changes, political events. But I could control my inputs. I could control how many hours I worked each day. I could control the rigor of my research methodology. I could control whether I said yes to opportunities that aligned with my skills or no to distractions that didn't. I could control my learning curve. I could control my professional relationships. Those were all inputs, and inputs are almost entirely within your control. And here's the economic principle that most people never grasp. If you maximize your inputs consistently over time, you dramatically increase the probability of positive outcomes, even though you don't control the outcomes directly. It's not a guarantee. Life doesn't offer guarantees, but it's the highest probability strategy available to you. Think about it this way. If you control nothing but your effort, and you put in maximum effort for one day, what happens? Probably nothing. One day of great effort rarely produces visible results. But if you put in maximum effort for 365 days, something will happen. Maybe not what you expected. Maybe not what you hoped for, but something will happen because sustained input eventually produces output. That's not motivation, that's mathematics. When I was rebuilding at 29, I didn't know if my research would matter. I didn't know if anyone would read my papers. I didn't know if I'd get tenure anywhere. I didn't know if I'd ever make enough money to feel secure again. I couldn't know any of that because I didn't control it. But I did know this. If I did rigorous work every single day, if I asked important questions, if I challenged conventional thinking, if I built relationships with other serious scholars, the probability that something good would happen was much higher than if I sat around feeling sorry for myself. And that's exactly what happened. Not immediately, we're talking years here, not weeks, but it happened. By my mid-30s, I had steady work. By my late 30s, I had a growing reputation. By my 40s, I was at Chicago doing the work that would eventually define my career. By my 50s, I was influencing policy at the highest levels. And by my 60s, I won the Nobel Prize. But none of that was the plan. The plan was simply this: do rigorous work today. Let the outcomes take care of themselves. Now let me address the question I know you're asking yourself right now, but Milton, I don't have years to rebuild. I need results now. I have bills due. I have responsibilities. I can't just focus on long-term inputs when I'm drowning in short-term problems. I hear you. I was there. Rose was pregnant. We had a toddler. The rent was due, and my theoretical economics weren't putting food on the table. So let me tell you what I actually did in the short term, because this is the practical side of the principle. I divided my controllable actions into two categories: immediate survival actions and future building actions. Both were essential. Both required daily attention. And the key was not letting the immediate survival crisis prevent me from investing in future building actions, even when it seemed like I couldn't afford to. Immediate survival actions, I took every paid opportunity that came my way, even if it wasn't ideal. I taught extra classes. I did consulting work. I took on research projects I wouldn't have considered before. Was this glamorous? No. Was it building my reputation as a serious economist? Not really. But it was keeping my family fed and housed, and that was non-negotiable. You cannot build a future if you don't survive the present. That's not pessimism. That's reality. But here's the critical part. While I was doing that survival work, I also carved out time every single day, even if it was just 1 hour, for future building work, work that wouldn't pay me anything today, but might pay me enormously later. Deep research, serious thinking, writing papers that challenged conventional wisdom, building relationships with people who were doing work that mattered. And this is where most people fail. When they're in survival mode, they put 100% of their energy into immediate survival, which makes perfect sense emotionally, but is economically disastrous. Because if you spend 100% of your time on immediate survival, you never build anything that moves you beyond survival. You stay stuck in survival mode forever, constantly scrambling, never getting ahead. So I made a rule. No matter how busy I was, no matter how much pressure I was under, I would spend at least 1 hour per day on future building work. Some days that hour was at 5 a.m. before my family woke up. Some days it was at 11 p.m. after everyone went to bed. But it happened every single day without exception. And do you know what that 1 hour per day adds up to? 365 hours per year. That's more than 9 full-time weeks of work dedicated entirely to building your future. Do that for 5 years, and you've invested almost a full year of work into activities that compound. Do that for 10 years, and you've invested 2 full years. And compounding returns on intellectual capital, on skills, on relationships, on reputation, on knowledge, are far more powerful than compounding returns on financial capital. But you have to start. You have to protect that 1 hour. You have to treat it as non-negotiable even when everything in your life is screaming that you can't afford it. Because the truth is, you can't afford not to do it. Survival without growth is just slow death. You're still breathing, but you're not living, you're not building, you're not creating options for yourself. You're just running in place, exhausting yourself until something breaks. The one mental shift that changes everything now, I'm going to tell you something that might make you uncomfortable, but it's the truth, and you need to hear it. Most of your problems are not caused by external circumstances. They're caused by your mental model of what you can and cannot control. Let me give you an example from my own career. In the 1960s and 72nds, I was advocating for free market policies at a time when Keynesian economics dominated everything. Every major university, every government policymaker, every influential economist believed that government intervention was necessary to manage the economy. And I was saying they were wrong. I was arguing that government intervention created more problems than it solved. I was challenging the entire intellectual establishment. Now, I could have spent my energy being angry that people weren't listening to me. I could have focused on how unfair it was that Keynesian economists controlled all the major institutions. I could have complained that the deck was stacked against free market ideas. And you know what? All of that would have been true. It was unfair. The deck was stacked. The establishment did control the institutions. But none of that was within my control. I couldn't control what other economists believed. I couldn't control what policies governments adopted. I couldn't control who got hired at major universities or who got funding for their research. So if I spent my energy on those things, I would accomplish exactly nothing except making myself bitter and frustrated. What could I control? I could control the quality of my arguments. I could control the rigor of my research. I could control how effectively I communicated my ideas. I could control whether I appeared on television to debate my opponents. I could control whether I wrote books that ordinary people could understand, not just other economists. I could control whether I helped train the next generation of free market economists. I could control whether I was patient and persistent, even when it seemed like nobody was listening. So that's where I put my energy, all of it. And do you know what happened? It took 20 years, but the world changed. Not because I controlled it, I didn't, but because I maximized what I could control. And eventually the outcomes shifted in ways I never could have predicted or engineered. By the 1980s, free market economics was ascendant. Reagan in America, Thatcher in Britain, reforms spreading around the world. Did I cause that? No. I was one voice among many. But I had positioned myself through 20 years of controlled inputs to be ready when the opportunity came. And when the intellectual climate shifted, my ideas were there, fully developed, well articulated, ready to be implemented. But none of that happens if I spend the 1960s being angry and bitter about the dominance of Keynesian thinking. None of that happens if I waste my energy trying to control what other people think. None of that happens if I don't focus exclusively on what I can actually control. Do you see the pattern here? This principle, focus on what you can control, isn't just about rebuilding after a financial loss. It's about every single challenge you will ever face in your entire life. Every career setback, every business failure, every relationship problem, every economic crisis, every time reality doesn't match your expectations. And here's the mental shift that changes everything. Stop asking, why is this happening to me? And start asking, what am I going to do about this? Because the first question is focused on things you cannot control. The past, other people's actions, luck, circumstances. And the second question is focused entirely on things you can control. Your response, your actions, your choices. That shift in questions represents a complete reorientation of your mental energy from the uncontrollable to the controllable. And it's not just semantic, it's economic. Because mental energy directed at uncontrollable factors produces zero return, while mental energy directed at controllable factors produces positive returns that compound over time. Let me make this even more concrete. Right now, wherever you are in life, you're facing challenges. Maybe you're in debt. Maybe you lost your job. Maybe your business is struggling. Maybe you're not making the progress you hoped for. Maybe you're watching younger people pass you by. Maybe you feel like you wasted years on the wrong path. Whatever it is, I guarantee you that you're spending some portion of your mental energy on things you cannot control about that situation. Well, here's what I want you to do, and I'm serious about this. Get a piece of paper right now. Draw 3 columns, just like I did in 1941. Column 1, things I cannot control about my current situation. List everything. Be honest, be thorough, get it all out. Column 2, things I can control. This list should be shorter, but it should exist. There is always something you can control, always. Even if it's just your attitude, your effort, your learning, your next decision. Column 3, actions I will take this week. Only things from column 2 belong here. Only things you can actually control. And here's the key. Make this list small. Don't put 15 things. Put 3 things. 3 actions you can definitely do this week that are 100% within your control. And then do them, not when you feel motivated, not when circumstances improve, not when things get easier. Do them this week, regardless of how you feel, regardless of what else is happening. Because those 3 actions are the only things that will actually move you forward. Everything else is noise. Why persistence isn't enough, but you need it anyway. Let me tell you something that nobody wants to hear. Persistence alone doesn't guarantee success. I've seen plenty of persistent people fail. I've seen plenty of hardworking people stay stuck. And I need you to understand why. Because if you don't understand this, you'll waste years of your life persisting in the wrong direction. The problem with most advice about persistence is that it assumes all persistence is equal. Just keep going. Never give up. Winners never quit. But that's nonsense. Persistence in the wrong direction is just stubbornness. Persistence without learning is just repetition. Persistence without strategic thinking is just exhaustion. So let me give you the real formula, the one that actually works. Persistent focus on controllable inputs, combined with constant learning and strategic adjustment of which inputs you focus on. That's a mouthful, so let me break it down. When I was rebuilding my career after losing everything, I was absolutely persistent. I worked every single day for years without meaningful breaks. But I wasn't just doing the same thing over and over. I was constantly asking myself, is this input producing any return? Is this effort moving me toward my goals? Is this the highest value use of my limited time and energy? And when the answer was no, I adjusted. I didn't adjust my commitment to doing the work. That stayed constant. But I adjusted what work I was doing. I experimented with different research questions. I tested different ways of communicating ideas. I tried different types of professional relationships. I measured what was working and what wasn't, and I shifted my inputs toward what was working. This is the difference between productive persistence and stubborn persistence. Productive persistence is when you're committed to inputs you can control, but flexible about which specific inputs you choose based on what you're learning. Stubborn persistence is when you lock on to one specific approach and refuse to adjust even when it's clearly not working. Let me give you an example from my research. In the early years, I was working on technical economics papers for academic journals. This was what serious economists did. You published in prestigious journals, you impressed other economists, you built your academic reputation, and I was persistent. I worked hard on those papers. But after a few years, I noticed something. Very few people were reading them. I was having minimal impact outside a small circle of academics. My ideas weren't reaching policymakers, weren't reaching business leaders, weren't reaching ordinary people. Now, I had a choice. I could persist in the same direction. Keep writing technical papers. Keep trying to impress academics. Keep working within the system that existed. That would be stubborn persistence. Or I could ask myself, what input can I control that might have more impact? That would be productive persistence. So I made a strategic adjustment. I started writing for broader audiences. I started appearing on television. I started writing newspaper columns. I started producing a TV series called Free to Choose that explained economic principles to ordinary people in language they could understand. Was I still persistent? Absolutely. I was working harder than ever, but I had shifted my inputs toward higher impact activities based on what I was learning about where my efforts could actually make a difference. And that strategic adjustment changed everything. Suddenly, millions of people were engaging with my ideas, not just a few hundred academics. Policymakers were calling. Business leaders were interested. Students were getting excited about economics. The impact multiplied exponentially, not because I worked harder, I was already working hard, but because I had strategically adjusted which inputs I was focusing on. So here's the question you need to ask yourself. Are you being productively persistent or stubbornly persistent? Are you committed to inputs you can control while remaining flexible about which inputs you choose? Or are you locked into one approach, grinding away, hoping that if you just keep doing the same thing long enough, it will eventually work? Because here's the hard truth. If what you're doing isn't working after a reasonable period of time, and by reasonable I mean months or years, not weeks, you need to adjust, not give up, not quit, adjust. Try different inputs. Experiment with different approaches. Measure your results. Learn from what's working and what isn't, and redirect your persistent effort toward higher return activities. This is how you maximize the return on your persistence. This is how you make sure that your hard work actually produces results instead of just producing exhaustion. Because persistence without learning is just spinning your wheels. But persistent focus on controllable inputs combined with strategic adjustment based on learning, that's the formula that actually works. The final principle, how you transform everything, starting today, we're coming to the end here, and I want to make absolutely sure you leave with something. You can actually use not just inspiration, not just theory, but a practical framework you can apply starting today to rebuild whatever needs rebuilding in your life. So let me give you the complete formula. The one that saved me at 29 and has guided every decision I've made for the next 75 years. First, accept reality completely. This is non-negotiable. Whatever happened to you, whatever you lost, whatever went wrong, you have to accept it. Not like it, not agree with it, not think it was fair, but accept it as fact. Because until you accept reality, you're spending energy fighting something that already happened, and that energy produces zero return. The $47,000 I lost, it was gone. I couldn't change that. I had to accept it before I could move forward. Whatever you lost, whatever went wrong in your life, accept it. Write it down. Say out loud, this happened. I cannot change it. I accept it. And then never spend another moment of mental energy wishing it hadn't happened. Second, identify what you can actually control right now, not what you wish you could control. Not what you used to control, not what you'll be able to control someday, what you can control today. Make this list brutally honest. Most things aren't on this list. Your past isn't on it. Other people's opinions aren't on it. The economy isn't on it. Market conditions aren't on it. Most outcomes aren't on it. What is on it? Your effort, your learning, your choices about where to focus your time, your professional relationships, your health habits, your attitude toward challenges, your persistence. That's about it. Those are your controllable inputs. Everything else is noise. Third, choose 3 controllable actions you will take this week. Not 10, not 20, 3. Things you can absolutely, definitely do regardless of external circumstances. Things that are 100% within your power. Things that move you towards your goals, even if it's just one tiny step. Write them down, schedule them, and then do them no matter what else happens, no matter how you feel, no matter what obstacles arise. Fourth, measure your progress on inputs, not outcomes. Stop asking yourself, am I successful yet? Start asking yourself, did I do the 3 things I said I would do this week? If yes, you're winning, period. Success isn't about outcomes in any given week. Outcomes are lagging indicators that take months or years to manifest. Success is about inputs. Did you do what you could control? If you did, that's success, even if the outcomes haven't shown up yet. Fifth, adjust your inputs based on learning, but never adjust your commitment. Be absolutely committed to persistent action. Be flexible about which actions you choose. If something isn't working after a reasonable period, try something different. But never stop doing something. Never take a week off from controllable inputs. Never say, I'll start again when things get better. Things get better because you keep going, not the other way around. Sixth, repeat this process every single week for the rest of your life. This isn't a temporary strategy for crisis. This is how you operate always. In good times and bad times, in success and failure, in certainty and uncertainty, you always focus on what you can control. You always take action on those inputs. You always measure progress, not outcomes. You always adjust based on learning. You always persist. That's the formula. That's what saved me at 29. That's what built my career. That's what won me a Nobel Prize. That's what gave me a life of impact and meaning and fulfillment. And it will work for you too, but only if you actually do it, not just understand it intellectually. Because here's the final truth, the one I really need you to hear. You're going to die someday. I'm 94 years old. I know this more acutely than you do. You have a limited number of days left, and every single day you spend focused on things you cannot control is a day you've wasted, a day you'll never get back, a day you could have spent building something real. I lost $47,000 at 29 years old. That was 65 years ago. Do you know what that money would be worth today if I'd invested it well? Maybe $10 million, maybe more. That's a lot of money. But do you know what focusing on what I could control instead of mourning that loss produced? A Nobel Prize, books read by millions, ideas that shaped policy around the world, students who went on to do important work, a career of meaning and impact, a life well lived. I made a choice at 29 to focus on what I could control instead of what I'd lost. And that choice compounded for 65 years. Your choice today will compound for however many years you have left. So what are you going to choose? Are you going to spend another day, another week, another month focused on what you lost, on what's unfair, on what you can't control? Or are you going to make the same choice I made at 29 and focus exclusively on what you can control right now, the path? Forward isn't easy, it isn't fast, but it's there. It's always there. And it starts with one simple decision. Today, I'm going to focus on what I can control. Tomorrow, I'm going to make that same decision again. And the day after that, and the day after that, until one day you look back and realize you've built something extraordinary out of nothing, just like I did. So here's what I want you to do right now. Before you close this video, before you move on to the next thing, write down 3 actions you can control that you will take this week. Not things you hope happen, not outcomes you want. Actions you will definitely take, things 100% within your power, and then do them. And then come back next week and write down 3 more. And do this every single week for the next year. And I promise you, I absolutely promise you, 1 year from now, you'll barely recognize your life. Not because circumstances magically improve, but because you changed how you respond to circumstances. And that changes everything. I'm Milton Friedman. I lost $47,000 at 29 and discovered the one principle that doesn't just rebuild finances, it rebuilds lives. You cannot control what happens to you, but you can always, always control what you do next. And if you choose to control that, to focus on that, to persist in that every single day, you're going to make it. I know you are, because I did. And so can you. Now go. Take action. Focus on what you can control. And don't stop until you've built the life you want. Your future is waiting, and it starts with one choice, one action, one day at a time.